What's good, y'all? It's the Demouchets REACT, and we're back with another video. Who we got today, C?
Today we're back with another American reaction.
Yes.
Super excited about this video, guys. If you're new to us and we're new to you, make sure you scroll down, hit that subscribe button, and turn on the post notification bell
because we're on the road to 100K.
And we cannot get there without you guys, all right? Join the family. Without further ado, let's get into the video.
Get it.
As many of you know, if there's any region of the planet I find more demographically fascinating than any other, it's our neighbors to the south. And I hope I've done a good job shattering the Hollywood illusion that all Latin Americans are culturally, religiously, or physically the same. But one aspect of Latino identity that I find neglected is the presence of black or African blood in the region. This is definitely not a subject well known to the U.S. American or global populace, but needless to say...
I know, but I was talking to them. I wasn't really talking to you.
Oh, I'm just saying. Nah, she looked just like her. Y'all seen the picture side by side? Y'all be like, wow, the hair and all.
Right.
Hair and all.
The black or Afro Latino community is of great importance to the social fabric of Latin America, found in nearly every single country south of the U.S. border, yet their presence in American lexicon is virtually non-existent. As we'll discuss later in this video, well over 90% of slaves that crossed the Atlantic ended up in Latin America or the Caribbean, as opposed to the United States, meaning the number of African descendants in this region well outnumbers that in the U.S., and the community has several interesting quirks, such as having the only surviving monarchy in the Western Hemisphere. From the jungles of the Amazons to the deserts of the Sonora, it is still possible to find pockets of black Latinos in nearly every region of Latin America, yet how on earth did they get there anyways? The history of Africans in the Americas stretches back to the days of Columbus, very shortly after the arrival of the Spaniards in the West Indies, as the Taino and Carib Amerindians rapidly began to die off from Old World diseases, and the Spanish and Portuguese imported slaves from Africa in large numbers to replace their labor, mostly from Central and West Africa, and over time these groups gradually coalesced into a single identity and ethnicity, similar to what occurred in the United States. There are multiple types of African descendants in Latin America today, each with widely varying cultures, appearance, and traditions, the largest and most iconic of which being the Hispanic Afro Latinos, that being the descendants of former slaves owned by the Criollos, meaning the American-born Spanish elite, who formed their own communities following the abolition of slavery in these countries. They're scattered throughout all areas of the Americas, having no central genetic or cultural unity, although they do all generally speak Spanish as a first language, have Spanish surnames, have varying degrees of European and other non-African admixture, and are generally fairly culturally assimilated into their host countries, with the only main differences between them and their white or mestizo neighbors being their complexion, although they do have certain cultural quirks.
So that's one of the things that has always intrigued me when it came from when it comes to African Americans and people of African descent in the other parts of the Americas. Here we're a minority, but we've been able to have our own identity.
True. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. I'm just saying just how we reacted to the Brazilian video on how a lot of people didn't really realize that they were black until they were adults.
The early adult age.
So they've been able to assimilate in the places that they're in. And it's a larger population of them in the other Americas in comparison to America. That's why I want to understand the history of all of these countries, because we learned about the whitewashing that they did in, some areas of the Americas. So I wonder if it was that throughout the whole region, because here it was definitely not that. Now I know we did had some people passe blanc, the lighter skinned African Americans pass for white if they could. And so that lasted generations and generations, and there may still be people who don't realize that they're black because they're a person who they're descended from passed as white. And we still have cases like that today. So that has always been interesting to me.
I think though, even though they do come from a descendant of, potentially white races or whatnot, once they got together and once they was dropped off, they knew how to build a community among each other and still work together in such a peaceful manner. And I think that's more of a appreciation that I like to, show to them. You know what I'm saying? Because I like
definitely.
that. I like that.
Definitely. And also, I feel like the government has a play in it as well. Because here, we go all throughout our life, even before we leave the hospital, and we know you're black. Because you got to fill out what you are, right?
Yeah.
In their countries, they fill out, they may not even have a place to fill out.
Yeah, real talk.
Everybody is, Brazilian or Venezuelan or, wherever you are.
But I think they come together and they start to tap into who they are because of culture. So when they get together and they start to experience and embrace, their roots and who they are and what feels necessary and what don't feel necessary, then they can identify with themselves a lot better.
But a lot of them don't know that
slowly,
they are even black,
slowly,
or have black ancestors, whatever.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, we still learning about y'all. You know.
This is the same in Brazil, which actually has a larger Afro-descendant population than Hispanic America in terms of numbers and percentages, although the Afro-Brazilian population does not include those of self-described Pardo ancestry, even though Afro-Brazilians very often have large degrees of non-African admixture themselves. Some sources even claim that as high as 1 in 4 Brazilians is of African or mostly African ancestry, which dubious, but we'll touch on that again later. Another much smaller community are those collectively known as the Maroons, a heterogeneous group comprised of runaway slaves who escaped from their Spanish masters hundreds of years ago, forming their own communities deep in the jungles or mountains of whatever country they live in, and may speak Spanish or a Creole language highly influenced by African languages, as because the Maroon communities formed so long ago, the average Maroon has far less non-African admixture and cultural influence than any other group in the Americas, being near.
Okay, so
yeah, you got it. That was your phone.
Yes. Okay, so we didn't have many. I can't even say that. Not a lot of people know about a lot of the Moor communities that we have in the United States. So a lot of our, just speaking in terms of Louisiana, along the southern part of Louisiana, our Moor communities actually move closer to the swamps, because you know how when they would try to catch the runaway enslaved people, they wouldn't go as far as they went into the swamps, and that's how they were able to thrive. But I can say
they used to talk about their boots. They said their boots or something they had on their feet when allowed them to cross, something like that.
Yes. So I feel like I would look. We have a lot to share with y'all. Okay?
Now, what about the Maroons? I felt like they had a good cultural background to where they could still tap into their ancestries, other than the Latino Afro-Americans.
What do you mean?
Well, I had made a mention earlier that with the first group, the Latino Afro-Americans, they had a white descent. They was kind of like whitewashed almost into not knowing who they were anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And then the Maroons, they actually got away.
Right.
They
have that community.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have that community.
Okay.
So I wonder, like, how big of the populations were those communities? Look how we just connecting the branches and the trees and all
We getting it.
Full-blooded Africans, and hence have a highly divergent culture from the countries they live in, and may still be isolated to this day. However, in pretty much all other African-descended communities in Latin America, there has been a huge degree of intermixing between other races around them, which has given rise to many different new combinations, such as mulattoes of mixed European and African descent, Zambos of mixed Amerindian and African descent, Douglas of mixed Indian and African descent, as well as combinations of all these other previous groups. Now, this becomes slightly confusing, seeing how in some Latino countries, these various subgroups very often intermix, leaving very little distinction between the various ethnicities. As for instance, in Colombia, little distinction is made by the government and the general populace between Afro-Colombians, Zambos, or mulattoes, with all simply being considered black. while in contrast the Caribbean country of the Dominican Republic makes a huge distinction between the average Dominican mulatto and the more recently arrived Haitians, who are generally far darker with less non-African admixture. It's common for many in America to simplify the Dominicans' complex history and demographics by branding them all under the label of black. However, the overwhelming majority of Dominicans in the country today reject such a label, refusing to conform to America's racial dichotomy, which only sprung up a couple hundred years ago, compared to the 500-year history of mixing and Spanish heritage in the Dominican Republic. Colombia's African...
Okay. So this is the thing with like the racial, I guess you would say segregation, because we don't all say American.
Yeah.
I mean, wait, I'm speaking from my thoughts. Okay, so the thing is, I feel like we have to identify what we are, our ethnicity, so much. That is one of the first things that we say.
Yeah, we don't say American.
Yeah, we don't
say
we're American.
Black. Yeah.
We didn't honestly start saying American so much until we had this channel, right?
Yeah,
and I would love if we just had to identify as just being American. But what?
I'm keeping my thoughts to myself.
But still showing our lineage and our heritage. I love being able to say that I'm African American, I'm Black American. I love that.
Yeah.
You know, I take pride in that. I know my history of my people in this land. So I take pride in that. But I do understand what they're saying. They don't want to conform to American, you know, the system that America was created out of. I understand that completely.
No, I do 100% too. I really do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Descended population as a percentage is actually quite comparable to that of the United States, officially sitting around 11% of the population, and you might see this as strange, seeing as how African Colombians have very little representation in Colombian media or American media depicting Colombia, but this is easily explained as the majority of Afro-Colombians are actually concentrated on the country's western coast with the Pacific Ocean, where they make up a strong majority all the way down to the Ecuadorian border, and make up less than 2% in the major Colombian cities located in the center of the country. In fact, a band stretching from...
That's a gap. That's a big gap.
That seems a bit like segregation. You know, another thing is then you'll have issues such as in Brazil, where we were having conversations with grown adults on that video, who were expressing their views on not having as much representation in who they are and understanding the strong lineage of people that they come from, you know. So it's a pros and cons to everything, but I do understand why they wouldn't want to, you know. But then again, it's like that's a touchy subject. That's a touchy subject.
I feel like this conversation, you know, you can drop a bomb on it easy.
Yeah, but I feel like
and make it make sense, but at the same time, it's like,
I would love to hear it from their point of view, not someone else speaking from them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
so.
I stand on that 100%. I'd rather hear it from their mouth, the source themselves, before someone put any idea into the atmosphere to make people think what is necessarily not the truth or 100%. Right. It's a 50-50 type of, you know what I'm saying? Like, so yeah.
Southern Panama to northern Ecuador is dominated by those of African descent, so think of this region as Hispanic America's Black Belt, similar to the high concentration of blacks in the American South, although over the centuries the Afro Latino community has spread out to virtually every region of Latin America, especially in Brazil, with the largest percentage being around Bahia in the northeast, although even the white southern states have modest minorities of Afro-Brazilians. The majority of the nations of Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Brazil have at least some degree of African ancestry. Even many self-identified whites or blancos in these areas may have up to 5...
So this is the problem I have with that map that he showed of the United States. The areas that we're from was not... New Orleans is a majority black city, and it was not highlighted on that map.
Yeah, I wouldn't go off those statistics. Not
Yeah,
100%.
that map was kind of, I don't know about that.
Nah, a lot of stuff you see like that, you gotta go fact check yourself.
Yeah.
It's not always gonna be
Southern
accurate.
Louisiana is a big population, and that was
That was a
not-
very small compared to the whole map that they show of America. That was a very small, like
Yeah, it was
that
that
was very
band.
that was very small.
Okay.
5 to 10% African genes, which is comparable, perhaps a bit higher than many old stock southern whites from states like Louisiana, South Carolina, or Florida. Although because of the higher degree of miscegenation in Latin America, these African genes are more spread.
So did you catch the map about the African
map.
of
Rewind a little bit. It was okay.
Bit higher than many old stock southern whites from states like
Ancestry.
Louisiana.
Self-identified European Americans who have 1% or more. Oh, okay, of
Yeah.
more African ancestry. Okay, yeah, that's correct.
like the whole map to me?
Yeah,
See a little dark
Yeah.
shade all over this
that's
thing.
more of an accurate of where we are.
Louisiana is
The
green.
blacks.
The green.
South
as a
Carolina, or Florida. Although because of the higher degree of miscegenation in Latin America, these African genes are more spread out. Although around 40 million Latin Americans actively identify as black or of African descent out of Latin America's current population of over 600 million, those with at least some visible African ancestry is triple this amount, or in other
Brazil.
words, 1 in every 5 Latinos. The percentage of people in Latin America of African descent was far higher in the past, before the major waves of European migration and interregional flux diluted the African genes into the mixed race population. However, Afro-Latino communities are still present in virtually every Latin American country, from Mexico to Chile. In the early 19th century, some Central American cities like Tegucigalpa, San Salvador, and Panama City were upwards of 80% Afro-descendant or mulattoes, with this percentage rapidly falling in the next 100 years. This is because although initially the large cities were mostly full of Criollo slave owners and the mulatto or African ex-slaves, over time mestizos from the countryside gradually migrated to these cities, displacing or assimilating nearly the entire Afro-descendant community, leaving only small traces behind. In fact, it's highly probable that the small Central American country of Belize, once a bastion of Afro-Belizean Creoles, will see their African-descended population be absorbed into the incoming mestizo population that has recently arrived from countries like Guatemala, Mexico, Honduras, and El Salvador. Over time, these African genes have dispersed throughout the population of these different Latino countries, depending heavily on the region or self-identified race, but generally, even mestizos from Hispanic America may have between 2 to 10% African DNA, Brazilian pardos around 15 to 30%, and even some Amerindian groups may have small amounts of admixture through runaway slaves who settled in their communities. But let's take a look at the demographic profile for those who actively identify as black in Latin America and the Caribbean, rather than all of those with any African ancestry. As with other Latin Americans, Afro-Latinos are traditionally Catholic, although increasingly Protestant and evangelical movements have taken a hold in many of these communities. Although interestingly, a small minority, about 5%, explicitly practice some sort of old traditional animistic African religion, such as voodoo, candomblé, or Santeria, in contrast to the United States, where these practices have more or less disappeared, and even many self-described Catholics, especially those in the Caribbean, still incorporate elements of these African faiths. Out of the approximately 48 million blacks in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is a slightly higher number than in the US and Canada, they are quite culturally and linguistically diverse because of the many countries they live in, with around a third speaking Portuguese, seeing how Brazil has the largest number, followed by smaller numbers speaking Spanish, such as those in Colombia, Mexico, or Peru, then French, such as that spoken in Haiti, the most African country in the Americas, and then English and various English-based Creoles are of course common throughout the Caribbean, as well as in the Guyanas and Central America, where many Jamaican, Barbadian, or other English-speaking Antillean immigrants migrated to within the past 200 years, and their culture is quite distinct from not only the surrounding Hispanics, but even the black Latinos, who are far more integrated into their home countries, speaking Spanish, and most, but not all, identify and have loyalties with their own country first, before any specific race or ethnicity. In recent years, many Latinos of full or partial African descent have been trekking north to the United States, particularly to the Northeast, such as Boston, New York, or D.C., or to Florida, only a stone's throw away from the Caribbean. And although this is giving slightly more recognition to this highly diverse, numerous group of people, it will probably take time for the American media to recognize that Latinos can be black, white, Asian, or any other race imaginable. Because, as I always say, Latino or Hispanic is not a race, but a cultural identifier. So please let me know your thoughts on the history and culture of African descent.
Yes.
Them stats gonna go crazy if they was to integrate the two like that as one.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem for people all over when it comes to discussing like our issues with blackness, people confuse ethnicity with nationality and culture. It's three different sectors. You know, they don't all mean the same thing. You know, it's just, we'd love to just know you guys' thoughts. Thank you for requesting this video. It kind of confuses us a little bit more.
I think I kept up with it for the most part, but I kind of get the main idea of what's happening in this video. You know what I'm saying?
Got the main idea, but I mean, you talked about a whole population of people in the Americas.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. I have to watch it again too, though. Again, like to get a little more insight of what he was saying in certain parts.
I want to hear it from their own mouths.
Yeah, the comment section is open. Like, guys, fill it up. We gotta hear it.
I just don't understand why the U.S. is always the one that is compared to, like, with us. I mean, I understand we identify as black, but we're a minority in a big country.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah. And as you see, well, I'm just, it's fine, y'all.
Yeah,
we're gonna end it right here.
Thank you guys for sending this video in. Would love to learn your thoughts on culture and on your heritage, right? So we hope you guys enjoyed this video with us. Like this video, subscribe, turn on the post notification bell. We have enabled our super thanks if you like to support the channel that way, as well as our reaction request form is in our description box below. We'll see you soon.
Peace.